My name is Linda Mandri, and this is Behind the Niche with K-Mag.
Hi everyone, my name's Anisha and we are back with Behind the Niche. I have an amazing guest today who is also another artist but does a different form of art, and I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Linda Mandri. I'm a mosaic artist with Maple Lane Mosaics.
Amazing. Okay, so you build mini worlds out of fragments. When did you first realize that, broken pieces could actually become something whole again?
Well, I mean, kind of a main point of my art is possibility and the possibility for change. I enjoy working with the pieces because you can transform them into anything. You might look at just a plain piece of red glass and it's nothing, but if you break it up and turn it into different shapes, it transforms. And there's so much possibility in that. So that's kind of really what drew me to this kind of art form.
Yeah, I love that. So you've also talked about on your platform about like how painting didn't really like necessarily work for you and your style. So what does your art tell that maybe regular painting couldn't?
I enjoyed painting. It just never really clicked for me. I would get frustrated. It just didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. I enjoy the way glass is, it's permanent, and each little piece has its own little spot. Like that spot is red, that spot is blue. I enjoy how the shapes make everything kind of look a little bit different. And the way you cut the shapes make everything different. So I enjoy the permanence of that and also the placement of it as well.
Totally understand that. I know for myself, I like painting, but also it's like when I make like a tiny mistake and then
Yeah,
sometimes I like try to paint over it and then it
yeah,
just ruins the whole thing. It totally
exactly.
for that. But yeah, I think that's also very cool about like mosaic pieces. So, great part on your side. Um, you didn't start actually making mosaics until you were kind of like in the near 40s range. So, what did that age bring to you that maybe something in your 20s couldn't have?
I mean, as I've gotten older, and this is probably true for a lot of people, I just find my world has expanded. When I was in my 20s, I didn't have much of a view of anything. I lived in Pittsburgh. I went to college in Pittsburgh. I took a job working for, the city because that's what my dad did. And I just didn't view myself as an artist. It was kind of like I was already set in my ways at 22 for some reason, which is ridiculous. It wasn't until I got older that and moved to New York City, of course, which changed my whole life. And I just realized that, there's so much possibility out there. And just because I wasn't an artist yesterday doesn't mean I can't be tomorrow. It's just, don't limit yourself. And that's kind of what I've learned as I've gotten older. And it's only getting better, and that's wonderful.
I love that. I know. I think everybody has a bit of creativity in them, and sometimes it
Right.
just takes some sort of thing in their life to kind of trigger that creativity and then push them into a more, creative lifestyle. And I think, especially now in today's society, we see a lot more people taking that creative step. So I love that for you. What part about the mosaic process do you think people underestimate? Like something that seems small but makes or breaks the whole piece?
Well, I mean, I make so many tiny little cuts with the glass, and really, if it doesn't come together right, it's just the whole piece can be ruined. I do strategically place every teeny little piece that you see to get the effect that I want. Even the little bricks, strategically, excuse me, place which colors go by each other to get the look I want. So I think people underestimate maybe just the time that goes into making all those cuts and really thinking about placing each piece.
Yeah, of course. Have you ever thought, like, when you're making like a piece, like mid-process, like maybe I might not be able to pull this off? And like, if that happened, like, what went through your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that all the time. But the good thing about mosaic is it's not perfect. No piece is perfect, and that's great. That's why I like it. It's unique, which is wonderful. But certainly, I've cut pieces and glued them, and like, oh my gosh, that looks terrible there. This piece is ruined. But you keep going, and then from the bigger picture, it looks great. and that's what I love about it.
I love that. I know, like, whenever like I'm ever like painting something or like doing something artistic, or maybe like I'm writing a piece, you can get so caught up in like trying to be perfect with it as when you're the only person looking at it. But then when you show someone else, they're like, I didn't even notice that small bit you're talking about.
Right.
So I totally understand where that point of view is coming from.
Yeah.
With mosaic pieces, grout is basically like the glue that kind of holds everything together. So I wanted to know, like, metaphorically, what's the grout in your life?
Me. I'm the I'm a mom. I'm a stay-at-home mom to two kids. So I've just, it's easy, especially as a mom, to kind of just make yourself smaller and to kind of just fit in between where everybody else is. My husband works long hours, my daughter's involved in all sorts of activities. My son is 3 and has a lot of needs. So, I kind of found myself just moving around them. They seemed like they were the islands and I was just kind of in between them, just making sure everything worked. And, but they are supportive, but I had to push back and really value myself and my own time as well. And when I did that, they are supportive. It's just taking that initiative to value yourself and to let them know this is not working for me. I'm a person too, and I have needs. So I have done that, and it's working really well. Even my daughter, she'll help out with her brother more. So I'm really glad that I've kind of taken a stand for myself.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, personally, I can't relate to that yet, but
Someday,
right.
maybe. Who knows?
Um,
Maybe not. That's up to you.
um, of course, but yeah, I totally can see, especially like whenever I see like my mom doing stuff and like she's overworking herself, I'll always be like, hey, like, let's just go watch a movie. Let's go do something. You need your space. You need your time, right? So like whenever I see her doing her own thing, I just quietly move away and I'm like, she gets her little piece of time right now. But no, I love that. A little bit more on your artwork. Some of the pieces you've done, I've seen you do a lot. You've been doing a lot of like homes and buildings, but you've also done craftsmanship on like chairs, which I really loved, and some tables, and so much more. So, what do you think our spaces say that maybe our faces don't necessarily tell?
Well, when I first started out doing mosaics, I started on furniture. My idea was I would get vintage pieces and I would redo the tabletops because that's kind of something I wanted in my home. I like to fill my home with things that have meaning, things that remind me of a vacation or a happy time, or things that, are important to me. One of my favorite things is a large painting of some flowers that my grandmother did, that I have in my dining room. So, I think, everybody likes to feel at home in their space. And what you fill it with, is around you every day. So you have to fill it with things that bring you joy.
Yeah, I think that's very beautiful.
Mhm.
If someone gave you a photo of a totally ordinary apartment and asked you for a mosaic, what would you look at first?
Well, I would look for any sign of life, honestly, because that's really what my mosaics are all about. Is there a tree? Is there a vine? Is there a plant? I put people into, windows. I put dogs into windows, just to, kind of put some life into anything. Because apartment buildings are life. They're full of life, even if you can't see it necessarily from the outside. Behind every door is a lot of stories. So that's what I would try to do.
I love that. I know I've seen in your pieces that you have like little people that you try
Yeah.
to put in the windows. But I think that's like really beautiful, especially I love small details and bigger forms of art. So I love
Yeah.
that you include that in your artwork.
Yeah,
Have you
it's
ever made a piece that has like kind of like haunted you in either maybe a nostalgic way or an emotional way?
well, I made one table while I was pregnant with my son, and I've never posted it. I don't sell it. I just keep it for myself. And that's the piece, that really makes me just reminisce about that time. I was like really pregnant with him. It was summer, and I was, gluing these little pieces to this table. So that's something I'll always keep and I'll always value.
That's amazing. Um, Mosaics are actually a really old art form. So how do you keep your work, you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but how do you keep your work feeling alive and modern without losing some of that history?
Well, I do use a lot of older mosaics as references. The colors, I like to look at the color combinations they've used in the past, as well as the techniques and how they cut. A lot of the older ones are with stone. I use glass. Um, but there's a beautiful one in the Met Museum in Manhattan that I'll go to, and just to get ideas for how they've used glass in the past and the color combinations they've used. And I try to use that, reflected in my newer pieces I make.
That's amazing. Um, if in the future, mosaic art was suddenly exploded on TikTok, what would you want to make sure that people really understood about it?
That it's for everyone. I would hate if anybody looked at my pieces and they were like, oh, I could never do that, because it's not the truth at all. I started for 4 or 5 years ago, and my pieces did not look like they look now, but it's a lot of trial and error. It's just cutting glass and putting it together and until it looks right. But what I would want people to know is, try it. If it looks fun, give it a try. Don't be worried about, how it's going to look and if it'll be a failure. It'll never be a failure because you made it and it's yours.
I love that as well. Um, what's like one weird or wild, or maybe even like a wonderful idea that you've been maybe too scared or maybe like excited to try?
So I've been doing a lot of, city scenes. I do a lot of the individual houses and I do a street scene as well. So in the future, I would like to do more kind of maybe a fantasy world, maybe like, Diagon Alley for Harry Potter, or like, um, my son is totally into Mario. So maybe some sort of Mario land. So I'd like to do more of kind of a fantasy land in the future, maybe.
That would be very, very cool. Right when you said fantasy, I was like, oh my gosh, Harry Potter. And then you said
Right?
Harry Potter.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Because Diagon Alley would look so cool.
right. I know that. Well, I can't wait to see. Hopefully, you put something like that together. I'd love to see
Yeah.
it. Um, has there been a moment for you that you keep returning to when you create like a memory or a place or like a version of yourself?
So when I first moved to the city, I was 29. This was in 2012, and I decided I wanted to be a real estate agent, which is very difficult to do in New York City. So I spent months just walking the streets of the city. I would walk around to so many different neighborhoods that I would have never gone to. So my mosaics are definitely reminiscent of that time, and looking at the streets and the restaurants and the townhouses and everything that I got to see during my time walking the streets. So I think about that when I make my mosaics.
That's great. I see a part of like me as well when I like do stuff because like whenever I'm like I do a lot of writing, so like whenever I'm like trying to write about something specific and I'm like in a different place that I'm not usually on, maybe like on vacation, I'm always like taking pictures of like buildings or like areas that I think that I would love to like incorporate in my own world. So like that idea of like just walking down the street and just like taking in everything is something that like I completely relate to.
Yeah,
Um,
it's wonderful.
But yeah, I want to ask you, because you also mentioned this on your platform. When COVID hit, when the world shut down in 2020, what opened up for you creatively?
Well, I had time, which that's a lot of people had a little more time on their hands. I lost my job, everything was different. I moved out of the city. So I had newfound time and not really anything to do with it. And so that's kind of where the furniture thing started coming in, when I was like, I'm going to try to see if I can make this furniture. I first started doing a lot of paint by numbers. That was kind of what I started doing first, really. I wanted to paint, but it was so frustrating. So I would get these paint by numbers and, make the little, and it was just so relaxing to do that. And so, I was just kind of like, well, what else can I do with this newfound talent? So that's kind of, the pandemic gave me time to explore.
Yeah, totally. I don't know if you can see in my background. I actually have two paint by numbers up here. Actually, three. There's one right there too. But yeah, I also did paint by numbers because there was no way I was going to try to paint something as extravagant as those in the back. But one thing I hate about them is that if like I get one and then I don't use it for a while, then the paint dries up,
No.
and that just frustrates me.
No. And sometimes
Um,
it comes with dried up paint, which is annoying too. But yeah, no, I made so many. I was like, I have a whole closet full of them.
Right. I know that's exactly like I just hung up on my walls now because I wanted to spice it up. But
Yeah, no, they
yeah,
look great. Yeah, no, but it's so relaxing. I mean, I would recommend that hobby too to people.
I know, right? What's something ordinary that, people look over, but you can't stop seeing as like beautiful material in your mosaics?
I mean, just, like I was talking about the streets of the city, I think it's so wonderful the opportunities we have to see so many different things, especially in New York City. I think some people overlook it, they just walk down the street, they're on their phones, but, you look up, you see such gorgeous architecture. My God, it's amazing the inspiration that the city provides.
Of course. Now, I wanted to ask you a little bit more of a fun question. You mentioned your kids earlier and maybe like building or creating a mosaic of like Mario.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, do your kids ever give you ideas on purpose or by accident?
Yes, absolutely. I made a couple mermaid mosaics. I've made actually three, because my daughter likes mermaids, and my son was obsessed with a show called Bubble Guppies about some mermaid preschoolers that live under the
Yeah.
sea. So I used to watch it all the time, and I made three. They've all sold now. I don't have any of them left, but that they definitely inspired those pieces.
That's crazy. I love that they sold too, though.
Yeah,
So that's
other
lovely.
people like mermaids too.
Right. What's like the weirdest or most unexpected object you've ever thought of turning into a mosaic?
So I had this, I was doing yard ornaments for a while. I would get like I had like concrete mushrooms, and I had some snails, and I did a big fish. But it was early on, and I didn't do it properly. It was kind of plastic. The glue I was using wasn't very strong. So it's in my yard. It's falling apart. It looked cool in the beginning though. So, when I first started, I just started experimenting with all sorts of different things. I didn't know what I wanted to narrow in on. And that's one of the things I did.
That's great.
Yeah.
Maybe you could try making it again now with all the experience that you have.
Right.
One last question for you. Um, what is one piece of advice you would give to someone who maybe wants to try doing mosaics?
We just say just try it. It doesn't take a lot of money. I mean, you get a pair, some nippers for $10. If you don't want to get glass, you can use old plates, things like that, things you find around the house. And just try it. It's fun. You get to work with your hands. Cutting things up is nice. And then you glue it. You get to use grout. You go to the hardware store. I love it.
Amazing.
It's
Well,
worth a shot.
yeah, it's been great speaking with you. I hope
Yeah.
that you continue to, make these cool mosaics and inspire other people with your journey. But yeah, this has been Behind the Niche with Linda Mandri.